Avoidance will only chase you when these three needs collide. So before you are three circles. Now, each one is meant to represent a forbidden need. Now, to the avoidant, a forbidden need is something they're secretly craving, but they were taught to fear, deny, or just basically feel ashamed of wanting. Now, individually, each circle might stir something in the avoidant, a flicker of interest, a moment of connection, but I want you to imagine these three circles overlapping, almost like a Venn diagram. That intersection becomes a pressure point. It awakens something deeper than attraction, urgency. For the first time, an avoidance desire overrides fear. In other words, that's the only moment an avoidance stops running and starts chasing. All right, let's take a look at circle one. This is what I'm calling optimal stimulation. Have you ever heard of the optimal arousal theory? It was a theory introduced in 1908 by psychologists Robert Yerkes and John Dodson. It basically states that humans perform best when they're not understimulated or overstimulated. We crave just enough challenge to keep us engaged, not bored and not overwhelmed. Take a look at this graph. On the x-axis, you have arousal. Think stimulation, excitement, or emotional intensity. And on the y-axis, you have performance, how well someone functions or engages. Now, the curve rises, then it peaks, and then it falls. Too little stimulation and you're bored and you basically just check out. Too much and you're overwhelmed and you shut down. But right at the peak, that sweet spot in the middle is where humans thrive. Avoidants are a unique case though, because their nervous systems are wired for emotional self-protection. Their curve is tighter, more sensitive. So what feels like mild interest to you might already register as overwhelming to them. So they shrink their world, they numb their reactions, and they basically keep everything low stakes to avoid dysregulation. Now, here's the paradox. Even as they run from emotional intensity, they're starving for just enough of it to feel something real. So what does that mean? Well, let's play a game. Let's have this circle represent the avoidant and chart their experience on the graph. So what avoidants want is to live here, right at optimal arousal. But the thing is, unlike a normal person who has quite a bit of space available for optimal arousal, an avoidant does not. It's razor thin, which means anything can set them off and pull them out of the sweet spot. One wrong word, one unexpected emotion, one flicker of pressure, and they're out. Gone, shut down, emotional systems have gone offline. So here's the secret. Avoidants don't just need a spike of stimulation, they need a return to safety just as badly. And that return, it's not passive, it's active. It's you giving space on purpose, because after that moment of arousal, they have to downshift. I've always thought of this kind of like a volcano. So let's go back to our graph and put our avoidant back into the optimal arousal space. So contrary to what you think, optimal arousal sort of feels uncomfortable for them. They're not used to existing here. That's when the volcano in their minds begins to fill with pressure. And typically, the longer they stay in this thin little space of optimal arousal, the more that pressure builds until it finally explodes, and then they manufacture a reason to get out of the arousal space. What the avoidant needs when this happens are basically these built-in release valves to relieve the pressure in the volcano. So usually you do this by pulling back and then giving them space even when things feel normal. What this does is establish a thrill to safety loop. It's the rhythm that keeps the avoidant regulated and engaged. You give them just enough emotional stimulation to feel alive, and then you pull back and create space, giving their nervous system a chance to reset. And over time, that rhythm becomes the only pattern that doesn't scare them away. So that's need number one. The second need is what I like to call the Phantom X Goldilocks zone. Avid watchers of this channel should know that I talk a lot about Phantom X's, specifically as it relates to avoidance. The Phantom X, of course, being this one X from their past that they just can't seem to let go of. Avoidants are built a little differently, though. I'm a firm believer that they don't just have one Phantom X, but rather a Frankenstein X, stitched together from the best parts of all their past relationships. One X is affection, another's independence, someone else's sense of mystery, and the result is basically this impossible standard that no real person can ever really live up to, which conveniently protects the avoidant from having to fully invest in you. So keep that in mind, because we're going to switch gears here. Are you familiar with what the Goldilocks zone is? In astronomy, it's defined as the perfect distance a planet has to be from its star to support life. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Too close and everything burns. Too far and everything freezes. But in that narrow little band, life can actually thrive. I bring this up because it perfectly explains the second forbidden need. There's actually a Phantom X Goldilocks zone. It's the sweet spot, that narrow band of characteristics that the avoidant needs to see in someone to even basically consider chasing. So not too much vulnerability, but not too cold. Not too available, but not too distant. Mysterious, but still warm. Affectionate, but never overwhelming. Basically, you have to resemble their Frankenstein X just enough to feel familiar, but not so much that you become predictable or real enough to disappoint. Oh, and here's my favorite part. I'm not even sure avoidants consciously know they're looking for this. But when they feel it, when you land in that Goldilocks zone, something stirs. You basically become the one that they can't quite figure out. And they also can't quite let go of either, which leads us to our third forbidden need, the locus of control. So in psychology, locus of control refers to how much control a person believes they have over the outcomes in their life. An internal locus means that you believe you're in charge and your actions shape your destiny. An external locus means you think life just happens to you and you're at the mercy of fate, luck, or other people. Avoidants obsessively cling to an internal locus. It's not just a preference, it's their survival mechanism, because here's their facade. They project this image of always being fully in control. They're emotionally self-sufficient, they're untouchable, and they're never at anyone's mercy. But underneath that armor is a need they barely even admit to themselves. The forbidden need to actually share control, to feel like they can let someone in without losing the wheel. So they want to surrender just enough to feel intimacy, but only if they still believe they can hit the eject button at any time. This is without a doubt the trickiest need to fulfill for them, because it requires them to hold two conflicting truths at once. The I'm still in control truth and the I'm letting someone in truth. And for most avoidants, those two ideas feel mutually exclusive. Letting someone in has always meant losing control, and being vulnerable has always meant surrendering power. So even when they want to share control, their nervous system interprets it as danger. So they're either shutting down, lashing out, or retreating, all to protect that fragile sense of autonomy. Okay, so the question becomes, what can you do to allow them to let you in? And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure I have a satisfying answer. Here's what I've noticed. When you start satisfying those first two forbidden needs, becoming a source of just enough stimulation, landing inside that Phantom X Goldilocks zone, something starts to shift. You've proven you're different, and slowly they start to loosen their grip. But right now, everything I'm saying is all theory. I'd like to show you what the Venn diagram looks like in real life by taking one of my clients who ended up having an avoidant chase them again and breaking down each element of the Venn diagram overlap. This is Rachel. By the way, in full transparency, Rachel took advantage of my Seiter super offer community. That means she had access to members, weekly live streams with me, the full program library, and even a personal battle buddy to walk through the process with her. It's not just theory, it's structured, proven support to help make your avoidant regret leaving you or even help you move on. Now, if you want to join and take advantage of this and get 50% off everything I've ever created, you'll find a link in the description below. Okay, so what I'd like to do is focus on the first circle of our little Venn diagram, optimal stimulation. I'm going to play you a clip from my interview with Rachel that I think perfectly encapsulates this.
But he said when you stopped talking to me, and he would party on base because they couldn't go out either because they were shut down. he would just, drink with his guy friends. He's like, I really miss her.
Okay, so do you remember my volcano metaphor? Avoidants live just below eruption. They hover in that razor-thin zone of stimulation, where too much emotion feels like pressure, but too little leaves them numb and detached. What Rachel did was simple, but powerful. She disappeared, but not with the typical dramatic exit. There was just silence, stillness, right to the point. And that sudden lack of contact, that was the pressure change inside of his volcano. It disrupted his emotional flatline just enough to stir something, and she was consistent with it. That's the key that's missed so often because, let's be honest, most people don't stick with no contact long enough for the avoidance volcano to release pressure. They break silence too early, or they check in, or they ask for reassurance. You get the idea. All right. So that's one of Rachel's avoidance forbidden needs being met. What about the Phantom X Goldilocks zone? Well, check this out.
So fast forward, that was like how I started the social media. Then that's when he reached out, is when he saw me hanging out, with other guys.
Okay, the funny part about this is I actually don't think Rachel quite understands how perfectly this went for her. All right, quick recap. We know that avoidants aren't as prone to chasing normal people. They chase phantoms, the Frankenstein version of an ex built from their selective memory. So a few weeks after her breakup, Rachel starts showing up on social media again, but not with the typical sad posts or attempts to grab attention, just like these little glimpses of her life. And she looks pretty confident, pulled together, busy, alive. Then she posts a photo that changes everything. Rachel's out somewhere smiling with other guys. And without realizing it, Rachel has checked all the boxes that fall into the Phantom X Goldilocks zone. There's affection. She looks warm and present, the kind of person you can imagine having fun with, not someone bitter or closed off. Independence. Well, she clearly wasn't sitting and waiting around. She had a life now, and he wasn't in it. Mystery, there was just enough going on that he couldn't tell what her story was anymore. I mean, who were these guys? Was she dating again? Did she still think about him? And in a single moment, Rachel becomes the full package. Everything his fantasy was made of, but suddenly real and potentially gone. All right, so now we have two elements of our Venn diagram filled out. Next comes the third, the locus of control. I'll let Rachel take the floor here.
The one thing I did keep to heart, though, is leaving conversation, because I would always hear you talk about this.
That's a
it's
big
not
thing
who doesn't start it, who ends it, and that's
Yes.
the big thing I was trying to.
And do you feel that was accurate advice based on your experience?
Yes, because I've always been his person. He would always complain about his job and stuff, and I'd always be the person that would just stay up late to hear about him.
Okay, so that moment may not sound like much, but to an avoidant, it's kind of everything. Because what Rachel did was hand him back the illusion of control. She let him feel like the one who was now doing the chasing. Okay, so the big question here is, how does Rachel ending a conversation first give him the illusion of control? Well, avoidants are hypersensitive to emotional pressure, especially when they feel like someone is trying to pull more out of them than they're willing to give. So in most relationships, they're the ones who disappear first. They ghost, they shut down, they end the conversation. But when Rachel stops overextending and starts ending the conversations first, it creates this emotional imbalance, but in a subtle way. She's not clinging, she's not available on demand, she's not chasing connection, and that really shifts the power dynamic. Suddenly, he feels something that all avoidants hate feeling, uncertain. Because the person who used to wait for him is now the one walking away first. He doesn't know when the next conversation is going to happen. He's got no control of it. He doesn't know what she's thinking. Without realizing it, he's now the one waiting. It's not about her handing him control. It's about her removing the pressure, which makes him feel like he's free to reach out or not. And once he feels that freedom, he engages. There's no longer anything to rebel against. That's the illusion of control. He doesn't realize that she created the distance. He just feels like it's safe to close the gap. Now let's go back to our Venn diagram. This is where a lot of people mess up. They zero in on one of these needs. They think, if I just give them space and don't smother them, that'll make them come back. Or they'll say, I just need to beat the Phantom X. Sometimes you'll even hear them go, I stopped texting first, so now I know I'm not chasing. That should flip the power dynamic right. And listen, technically speaking, none of those instincts are wrong. They're just incomplete. Avoidants don't come back because just one lever got pulled. They come back when all three needs line up. But that's not even the biggest question I want to ask you today. The real question, maybe the only one that matters, is this. If this dynamic never changes, if you always have to navigate around their triggers, hold back your own needs, and chase this perfect intersection just to feel chosen, do you realistically think you can live the rest of your life that way? Because it's one thing to get them back and get them to chase, but it's another one to keep losing yourself time and time again in the process. Think on that, and then let me know where you land in the comments.